And we're live. Okay, you know how it is, folks. I'm just going to talk randomly for a bit until people show up. So I'm literally just talking to no one right now. Hi. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to the latest installment of Geek Speaks Greek. I am your geek, George O'Connor, speaking English clearly. The Greek in reference to this is actually Greek mythology. Each episode or installment of Geek Speaks Greek, I talk about a different personage from Greek mythology, be they goddess, god, hero, or monster. Today, we're going to be getting a lot of times I like to theme things by week, it's a Monday, Wednesday, a thrice weekly, a Monday, Wednesday, Friday show, and I like to do things in groups of 3. I've had this inkling for a while, if you've been watching, I've mentioned a lot about doing an Epic Heroes week. But here's the thing. There was more than 3 epic heroes I wanted to cover. There's actually quite a lot I could do, but the way I saw it, you gotta do Achilles, right? Today's about Achilles, by the way. You gotta do Odysseus. And then the third, what do? You could do Aeneas, and I'm like, I really want to do Aeneas. But then, there's also Diomedes. Diomedes is often the forgotten epic hero, but, he's pretty much the main character of the Iliad for about a third of it. You're kind of following the story of Achilles, and all of a sudden you're just following Diomedes for a while. And we'll get into that when we do his episodes. What I'm doing, it's kind of getting a head start. This Epic Heroes Week is going to be at least 4 episodes. And those are the people we're going to be covering. Today we're doing Achilles. I guess, actually I haven't decided. Monday, probably either Diomedes or Odysseus. Probably Diomedes, that makes sense. Wednesday, Odysseus. Friday, Aeneas. And then there's other characters too, wait, why aren't you doing one about Hector? Well, we're going to try to cover Hector today. But before we get into all that, if you've never watched an episode before, I'm just going to tell you, I have some of the best fans in the universe. And they are always sending me amazing fan art. And, okay, so we took a little bit of a break in order to reflect and learn from, we took a week off of Geek Speaks Greek. I got a lot of mail during that time, and I've been trying to go back and show stuff, and I feel like I'm going to have a few things slip through the cracks. So let me profusely apologize to anybody who sent work in during that time. If I don't share it, it's not that I didn't love it, it's just that there's always things coming in, and sometimes when I'm doing these things live, as I'm doing right now, sometimes I kind of accidentally forget to show something, think I showed it, and when we're dealing with stuff that's a week old, sometimes stuff gets overlooked. So I'm actually going back to one that is, this is only 2 days old. So no, this is not an older one. I've missed a few of your things, and I'm aware of this. I'll try to go back and really make a collection of this. But this is from the brother-sister team of Nora and Drake, although I think these are just Nora drawings. Here we have a Zeus as god of the sky, which, he is, and, that's great. And, I love when people do these pictures that, use the entire canvas, the way that you did the entire sky. And look at that Zeus. That's so great. And then also, and this was interesting, here we have, this one is definitely by Drake, yes. Here we have Hermes. And what I learned about this one, this is Hermes surrounded by, if you look, there's some space capsules. There's the space station stuff. I think this was I maybe have shown this one actually, now that this sounds familiar. But the idea that Hermes would be a god of space travel, I'm that makes a lot of sense. I'm just going to say something right now too. How weird is it that in the 60s and early 70s, I think it went to the early 70s, when people were being sent to the moon, that they called it the Apollo missions? Shouldn't they have been called the Artemis missions? I chalk this up to NASA being sexist back in the 60s. It seems like if you're sending people to the sun, call them the Apollo missions. Why are you calling, that's you're just rubbing stuff in Artemis's face. And you don't want to do that because Artemis is, she's pretty tough. So let's see. Couple weeks ago, I think it was 2 weeks ago on a Monday, I did an episode spotlighting my Lego Olympians, the custom-made Lego set of all the Greek gods based on my designs. Well, this is from Ingrid, and Ingrid has got me one better, where she made, is there a way to say this cleverly? She made clay Olympians based on designs. Look at these. You can see right there, there's Zeus and Hera. I think that's got to be Iris, because it's all the different colors of the rainbow. You can see Poseidon. He's holding his trident. He's got the green skin. Let me scroll up because there's a few of these. We have some close-ups where you can see, look. how awesome these are. So there's Poseidon. I think that's Aphrodite because look at her hair. Hanging back there, I'm pretty sure that's Apollo. Like, these are great. There's Hestia because he's on fire. I'm covering up the Hera. These are so cool. There's so much style and personality in them. Here we have a better shot of Hestia. Look at the Hades. Look at the Hades. These are so cool. I want to set. Oh, and there we have a close-up of the Zeus and the Hera. They're so cute. And there's really fun textures going on here. Like, this is some really nice work. The little Zeus, I mean, it's just going to touch his fat belly. I'm like, oh, you little fat Zeus. I love it. I love this so much. Ingrid, thank you so much for sending this in. That made my day. Oh, by the way, I'm going to be sweating profusely. I was bursting the AC in here in order to try getting it cool off. It's just hot. And I turned off the AC because it's very loud. So, I mean, you've all seen this before. I'm a sweaty guy. Let's see. Oh, man. I got a great comic from Yehi. That's so good. I know I say this all the time. I have to post this one up because it's hilarious. Yehi is a fan who writes in from Korea. She's a wonderful artist, and she's quite a wonderful writer, too. She did this I'm just going to talk about it for a second. I'll show you some of the pictures. Like, I don't want to kind of ruin it. She did, like, an amazing... So we talked about on Zeus Part 2 on Monday of this week. We talked about, like, Zeus's predilection towards taking on bizarre forms for his various seductions. And one of the weirdest is the story of Danae, who is the mother of Theseus. Never Theseus. Of Perseus. And she drew this amazing comic all about the idea of Danae, like, locked up alone in her tower, and how she sees, like, the reflection of the sky and the rain coming down. The rain is the golden shower that is Zeus. Hold on, I gotta show... Why am I having such trouble with this? Look at this, where she sees the reflection of... She sees her reflection in the puddle that the water makes, and the eye is blue because it's Zeus's eye, and then Zeus comes out. It's beautiful. And, like, this story is really... it's this great story, and then there's this one little page at the end, which is dark, but outright hilarious. And I'm going to post this whole thing up afterwards. You were amazing. Like, you're going to definitely be, like, doing the next Olympians after, like, I retire. I should mention, which is also really nice... I've been getting a lot of mail recently from people who started reading Olympians back when it first came out 10 years ago, and now we're in college. And it's, like, amazing. Like, people who've literally grown up reading my stuff. I don't tend to share those on here because they're, like, long letters and it'd be like me reading, look how important and cool I am. I love it. It's one of the greatest feelings to, like, know that you've created something that's gone out in the world and, like, people have loved it and they've come back to it as adults and they're like, oh, I see, you wrote this on 2 different levels. I'm like, thanks. That's super cool. So this is, I don't know if you guys remember Renka. She has sent in artwork a lot, and both of her parents are actually very talented artists as well. And so I think this first one here, let me see if I can make it bigger. This is Renka's mom. She drew an iris. And if you remember, it turns out Iris is actually one of her sisters, is the harpy. So here we have a harpy, like... I think that's eating a person's leg. There's definitely a fish bone sticking out of their mouth. There's man, this harpy has bad table manners. And Iris, all beautiful, is flying overhead being like, hi, sis, snack time? There's definitely a disparity in the looks in that family. And then I think this is Renka's dad. I may have this reversed. Drew a portrait of Andromeda. Because, I'm sure you all, as Olympians fans, know Andromeda was a princess of Ethiopia. And they were talking specifically about how in the old Clash of the Titans movie, she's played by a blonde-haired, blue-eyed woman. And they're like, wow, how did that happen? And it's not just there. It's one of the things that drives me kind of nuts. It's like, this character is explicitly stated to be from Ethiopia. Let's make her look like she's from Ethiopia. And this is just... That's a beautiful Andromeda. Like, so I love this drawing so much. And then Renka herself added a bunch of pictures. So we have Asterion the Minotaur hanging out in the labyrinth. You can follow the different routes to get there. I guess that's Theseus. Boo, Theseus. I'm not a fan of Theseus, as we know. Here, I love this picture. Look at this Athena. I love the way she's smiling and looking to the side. It's so nice. And then the owl's kind of like, I don't know, is the owl looking to the side or the owl? Owl's like looking at the top of Athena's head like, should I land there? That seems like a nice place to land, right? I'm going to land on top of her head. And then Renka also, and then, wherever Athena is, Hermes is often far behind, not often far behind. So there's Hermes again with the great smile. There's his sword, his very weird sickle sword. I hope that's his cape and not just a big puddle of blood. But it is hard to say because it's right beneath it. Yeah, he says that smile. I know it's all about the smiles. Like they both look like they're up to some shenanigans, right? And Sarenka, I mean, I shouldn't be amazed that you're an amazing artist because like both your parents are amazing artists. Now this is from Moira. Moira sends an artwork from time to time, and the name of this piece is A Drawing Worth Starting the Trojan War. So I'm pretty sure that this must be Helen. Helen, who oddly I have barely drawn. So I couldn't say based on my design because I think I've only drawn Helen in like 2 panels and from a distance. But there she is. The most beautiful woman in the world. We've talked about Helen a lot, and like the idea that like she is a daughter of Zeus, and so even though she's clearly on the mortal side of demigods, it seems like her beauty is such a power. Like that's the way her divine part expressed herself. And let's wrap this up with somebody we haven't actually heard from for a while. It's 2 people, Juliet and Joseph. This is from Juliet. She drew one of the Cyclopes. I mean, I love the dynamism, the sound effects, boom, boom. And then there up in the corner is, I think it's another Cyclops going, I thought it would stop by. So is it Argus, Brontus, or Steropus, this picture? It's hard to tell. I'm going to say it's Brontus. No, it's Steropus, it looks like, because it actually looks like it's lightning bolts. But then there's the thunder, so maybe it's Brontus. I don't know. This is kind of hard to tell. And then I think this is by Joseph, but I could be wrong. Yeah, it says Joseph, so yeah. Joseph drew a bunch of faces of different characters. Up top is Ares. Look at Ares. That's probably him screaming after he's been stabbed by the invisible Athena, who looks very angry. And then at the bottom, Deimos and Phobos, his sons, Fear and Panic. Oh, there's one more I want to show. I'm sorry, guys. Bear with me. It's hot. It's hot. And then someone who sends me stuff a lot, and I just haven't had a chance to show her stuff recently. This is Megan. Megan very famously is the one who ships together Hermes and Athena. She's very, and it's a kind of a mix I really like, and a lot of other people like it too. In fact, one of Yehi's comics is about the idea, which is, again, I'm going to post this online so you guys could read it because it's full of so much good stuff, is about the idea of, what if, they overthrew Zeus and Hermes and Athena ruled the Olympians together, and it kind of works out better, which makes sense. They're both smarter. So first we have here, I don't remember how we started talking about this. I think it was on the Q&A episode, but somebody asked, does the snakes, the serpents on Athena's Aegis, do they eat mice? And does her owls eat mice? And if so, does Athena have a fridge full of mice? And it was really gross, and we thought about the idea. So Megan drew the fridge full of mice. Because, yeah, Athena, just in wandering about on a normal day, she just has tons of dead mice around. Although I will point out, I'm pretty sure reptiles won't eat a frozen mouse. So that's just for the owl, I guess. Will an owl eat? I don't know as much about birds as I do lizards. Will an owl eat a frozen mouse? Will anyone eat a frozen mouse? And then a perfect lead-in for today's episode. This is Thetis, the Nereid, and she's presenting the baby Achilles to Hephaestus. Hephaestus isn't the father. Hephaestus is, if anything, he's kind of like the stepson of Thetis. They have a close relationship. I'll get into that a little bit in the episode. But, of course, Thetis is the mom of Achilles. And it's a good time to start the actual proper episode today. So let me take a drink of water because it is hot in here. So, Achilles. As I mentioned, he is the son of Thetis. Thetis is a Nereid. Now, I've talked about this before. We've all heard this. I have my issues with the fact that there's so many different water gods. I'm like, let it be Oceanus and then Poseidon. Boom, it's easy. But there were so many. And Nereus, he was kind of that god. I don't have him appear in Olympians, really. I don't think so. But he was kind of like a sea god before even Oceanus. He is described in Hesiod's Theogony as one of the first offspring of Gaia. Much the same way she created Uranos, the sky, and took it as her husband, she also creates Nereus, who was this first, god of the sea. He's often called the Old Man of the Sea. Nereus marries Doris, who I forgot who Doris's relationships are. I think she's a Titan's daughter. I forgot. They have 50 daughters named the Nereids. And the Nereids, the eldest of them, is Thetis. Now, Thetis, we first meet her in Olympians. If you've read my book Aphrodite, which I should have here, Zeus sees this beautiful woman frolicking in the waves. And I'm not going to find it. And he kind of flies down and is like, hey, how you doing? I'm Zeus. And she's like, oh, hey. And like, she's talking like she knows him. And he's like, I don't think we've met before. And she does, like, she's a great shape changer, just like an Olympian. She changes into all these different forms. She's like, well, I can look any way I want. So maybe you just don't remember. And he's like, I like all these looks. And he's going to be Zeus, which is creepy. And he's going to like cheat on Hera, which is not great. And then he remembers at the last second. The reason he knows Thetis is that there had been a prophecy put on her. Much the way Metis, who is the oldest of the Oceanides, the daughters of the ocean. See, I'm saying there's just too many water gods? Thetis, the oldest of the Nereids, another sort of sea god, had a curse placed on her. And whereas Metis's curse would be if she and Zeus had a child, the child would overthrow him. Thetis's curse was that whoever she has a child with, whoever the father of her child is, that child will be greater than the dad. So from the point of Zeus is king of the gods, greatest of all. He's in charge of everything. We know how eagerly Zeus holds on to his power. If he were to have had a child with Thetis, that child would have been more powerful than Zeus, would have been greater than Zeus. He realizes at last second, he's like, whoa, this is dangerous. And you can look like anything you want, and I have a bad behavior problems, and I'm not about to deal with my issues. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to marry you off to a human. Because his reasoning, and it's pretty good reasoning, I guess, better than the father. So if you marry this powerful goddess off to just some Joe schlub, her kid will be better than the schlub, the normal human, but still nowhere near a god level, and especially not near an Olympian's level. And that's exactly what happens. Thetis is married off to Peleus, who is the king of the Myrmidons, which is in Thessalonia, I think. And they have a child, and the child is Achilles. Now, I'm making this sound like Achilles isn't impressive, because he's not on a level of Zeus. And honestly, he's not even on a level with his mom. But he's still the greatest warrior of his age among the Greeks, or the Achaeans, as they're called in the Iliad. Achilles is the main hero of the Iliad. And we talk about the Iliad all the time here. The Iliad is written by Homer. It's one of the two major epic poems that survive to us from antiquity, the other being the Odyssey. And a lot of people in shorthand will call the Iliad, they'll actually call it like the story of the Trojan War. But it's actually not true. Like the Trojan War, that's like a battle that went for 10 years. And the part, like the Iliad, like literally only covers like a few weeks of that 10 years. And it's pretty far along. It's like year 8 or 9. It's like just this weird bit. It's basically, well, the opening line of the Iliad is translated many different ways, but it's normally translated as, O muse, sing in me and tell the story of the wrath or the anger of Achilles. And this is Achilles, this greatest warrior, this greatest hero of his time period, the amazing anger and wrath that he brings, and how it's something that weirdly the Greeks celebrated. There's different cultural undertones going there. We'll get into that. But it also ends up leading to his downfall. It's a fascinating... The Iliad is a fascinating read. It's just... some people here are probably a bit too young for it. I definitely recommend reading it. I definitely recommend reading it more than once, especially if you're like me and you can't actually read ancient Greek, because each translation you read will bring a different flavor to it. And there's so many different things to get in this. But I got off topic here, so what was I talking? So Achilles is born. He's super powerful. Now, if there's anything people know about Achilles, people tend to know the term... Well, have you ever heard the term someone's Achilles heel? It means the person who has the one weakness. And this comes from an idea that, as the story goes, Thetis, she knew about this prophecy, her son would be greater than the father. She has this mortal son. She doesn't not love him. She still loves him with every fiber of her being. And she takes this, but she also knows there's another prophecy. He's going to die young. His father will outlive him. And his father's mortal. She's like, I want him to stick around. And she knows he's going to be this great warrior and that he's going to die in battle. So she tries to make him completely invulnerable. And as the story goes, she takes him when he's a baby to the river Styx, the river that actually separates the land of the dead from beyond. And she dips him into there. And somehow that makes his body absolutely impregnable. He can't be stabbed. Except she's holding him by his ankle as she dips him in, by his heel. And so there comes this idea that Achilles can only be wounded in one spot, and that's in the heel of his foot. In the Iliad, that's not the case. The Iliad's written by Homer. We talk about Homer a lot. Sometimes his ideas are pretty weird, but I kind of like that he's on this side of this thing. There's like a scene explicitly in the Iliad where Achilles does get wounded. Somebody throws a spear at him and it hits his arm, not majorly, but there's like a spurt of blood. He's like, oh, like he can be wounded. It makes him a more interesting character. If he's like just like absolutely invulnerable, he's kind of a coward, right? Like you run into battle and like you don't have to worry about anything. Like, yeah, oh, you're the greatest warrior, big deal, you can't be killed. I could be the greatest warrior if I couldn't be killed. I'm not a good warrior. I'm jumping ahead, though. So the immortality, the whole idea of the Achilles heel. In fact, if you feel on the back of your foot, there's like that cord right under your skin. That's called the Achilles tendon. That's named after him, too. That's all something that comes later. In the earliest versions of Achilles, the Achilles that's in the epic poems, which makes this part of epic heroes myth, he's not invulnerable. He's very strong. He's very tough. He's insanely angry, like literally insanely angry, and he's an amazing warrior. His mom goes to other ways to protect him, if you choose not to believe the whole Styx thing. My favorite of these so he spends some time being raised by Chiron the centaur, like who raises him to be like a great warrior. Chiron's kind of like your stand-in generic guy to raise anybody to be good at anything. I think he trains Percy Jackson for a while. Eventually, he comes back to the Myrmidons. You may know this word Myrmidon. We talked about this in Zeus. Myrmidon, the people who are the Myrmidons, that name means literally like ant people, ant men. And the ancestor of the Myrmidons was seduced by Zeus in the form of an ant. So they have this kind of ant-like quality to them. If you think ants are amazing soldiers, they're very tough. They swarm over them. They're fearless. And these are the Myrmidons. And they even had this like kind of like, you'll see in artwork, their armor is often like drawn like kind of a glossy black or brown, just like an ant. And like they were like ant people. Not like, they weren't like the superhero. They didn't shrink and stuff. But that'd be pretty funny if they did. So, basically, for reasons that this episode is going to be really long if I don't cut some stuff out, the Trojan War starts because of the abduction of Helen. And Agamemnon, who's the leader of the Achaean forces, because they're not calling themselves Greeks yet, they're the Achaeans, is recruiting all the different kings of all the different city-states and islands of Greece to fight. And they go to the Myrmidons, and they're like, hey, we need to get your guy Achilles, we hear he's the greatest warrior around, and come fight. And they're like, well, there's no Achilles here. Turns out Thetis had sent years before Achilles to live with King Lycomedes, who, I don't remember where he's the king of. I've mentioned this before, because you know the name Lycomedes. If you watch my Theseus episode, and you can go always catch my Theseus episode if you didn't see it, on my YouTube, youtube.com/user/George Olympians. Lycomedes is the guy who straight up killed Theseus. When Theseus was an old man and he lost favor because he was an awful person and a terrible king and just a generally all-around awful person, he goes and hides with Lycomedes. And Lycomedes lives on a cliffside, and Theseus is hanging out on the cliff one day, and Lycomedes comes up behind him and kicks him in the butt over, and that's how Theseus dies. It's a pretty ignominious end. But the same king Lycomedes tries to hide Achilles in his court. And he hides him, they have a really interesting way. For several years, Achilles lives as a woman. Grows his hair out very long. I think he even takes the name Pyrrha, which means like fire, because in some sources he has orange hair. I don't give him orange hair, and I'll get to that later. And he lives there as a woman. And this story is kind of like, I'm not wild about the story, because Odysseus comes. He's been recruiting the troops for Agamemnon. Odysseus, as we will learn when we do his episode, very smart, way smarter than Achilles. That's his thing. He's kind of a trickster. He's like the Hermes of the Greeks, right? And he sees all these daughters of Lycomedes. He's like, I think one of these is Achilles. Probably the giant, tall, muscular one, but I can't be sure. And he takes out all these wares. He's pretending to be like just a traveling salesman. And he puts down like brushes and like jewelry and clothes and a spear. And all the daughters are like, oh, I'll take this. And one of them picks up a spear and he's like, aha! You're clearly a boy. I'm like, why can't I mean, literally, okay, Odysseus, your patron is Athena. She has a spear. I think that story, I don't love that story. But anyway, he does spend some time hiding as a woman, and he finally is found. And so then Achilles joins the battle. He takes 50 ships of 50 myrmidons each, which somebody who's at math could probably tell me, I think that's 500 people. And they join the forces, and they start the War of Troy, which I said lasts for 10 years. And then, after all this part, we're still not even up to the Iliad. The Iliad begins with... he's sulking. Achilles has decided he's not going to fight anymore. This is not an admirable quality that he does here. He's mad because he and Agamemnon had an argument. There was this woman named Chryseis. She was the daughter of the priest of Apollo of Troy. They both wanted her as their slave. And so Agamemnon pulls rank. He's the leader. He's like, no, I'm taking her. And so Achilles is like, well, I'm not going to fight anymore. And he sulks. There's so many things wrong with that, okay? Slavery is awful. Don't do that. Like, you're not, like, we're supposed to be on your side because you don't want to fight because of that. And he hangs out and sits back. And I'm going to simplify this grossly. I kind of already did a job of this where I simplified this in a huge way, just in my book Ares, where I kind of focused on the gods portions of this. And you see this stuff happening around the corners, but it's kind of not that, like, the main focus. I was more interested in the gods. The series is called Olympians, not various demigods. And so here's another thing that's interesting about Achilles. There's this man named Patroclus, who is his beloved. A lot of people wonder, are they lovers? Are they boyfriends? And then they're like, is he gay? Because then Chryseis he seems to like want for other reasons. And I think it's easiest to say with Achilles and with a lot of people in Greece, they didn't have, our society, we're getting better about it. But for many years, it was very much like, you're straight or you're gay or something like this. And I don't think in Greece it was viewed that way. I think it was just some people you loved that way and some people who didn't. And sometimes there were boys and sometimes there were girls. But he is definitely his beloved. Achilles is kind of a jerk, but he definitely loves Patroclus. And Patroclus is a bit more, let's say, dedicated to the fight than Achilles. While Achilles is sitting this battle out and being kind of like sad because he doesn't get to enslave a fellow human being, Hector, who is the eldest son of King Priam, the leader of Troy. Hector, by the way, easily the most heroic character in this. By our standards, anyone who reads the Iliad is like, oh, Hector's the good guy. Hector's like heroic. He's awesome. Everyone loves Hector. And he pushes back against the Greeks. And without their greatest warrior, the Trojans are really close to winning this thing. He pushes them all the way back to their camps, which are right off the water. They're about to push them into the sea. And Patroclus, who's like, Achilles, you got to do something. Achilles is like, no, go away, I'm sad. Patroclus takes Achilles' armor, and he rushes onto the battlefield, and he pretends to be Achilles. And seeing their greatest warrior take the field again inspires the Greeks to such a degree they're able to push the Trojans back into their castle, into their town. But unfortunately, he's not Achilles. And when he comes up against Hector, who is a great warrior, Hector kills Patroclus. And then that's what finally awakens the wrath of Achilles, that this whole story is centered on. Now, Hector takes his armor, because Achilles has this really nice armor, and he wears it. And now this is where I'm going to take a break, because I've been talking a lot without drawing. I want to actually draw a picture of what happens next. Now, I mentioned Achilles' mom is Thetis. Thetis, along with Eurynomy, was one of the two goddesses that took in Hephaestus when he was thrown off Mount Olympus as a baby child. So she's like his stepmom. Thetis goes to Hephaestus and is like, can you make a suit of armor, a great suit of armor for my son Achilles? And he's like, yeah, of course, you're my real mom. And so he makes him a suit of armor. And this is the suit of armor I designed for Achilles. Now remember how I said he's a myrmidon? His helmet creates this shape. The shape, it's a little hard to see. It's kind of the shape of an ant's head with its two mandibles down the side. He has a crest on top, and drawn with his angry face peering out. So he's not invulnerable, let's return to this idea. But he is wearing armor made by Hephaestus. So it's like he's the next best thing to invulnerable. It's like if you're going to battle and everybody else is dressed normally and Tony Stark gives you a suit of armor, you have a better chance of surviving. He's got the best armor going right now. Continuing the ant theme, and all this is glossy black. His breastplate looks like the carapace of an ant. It's got sculpted marvel muscle details into it. He has a belt. And then, instead of like a loincloth, he has like a little piece of armor that comes down and covers his, front area, because there's some stuff you don't want to get hit there with a spear. And that also looks like an ant. So you can kind of see how there's like the shape of an ant there. There's his arms. He is very powerful. I don't want to take away from that. He has wrist guards. He has some side pieces of armor. So there's a little bit here. He can move his legs through the side. I didn't leave myself enough room to draw the feet. So I'm going to move his leg up. Because, as a nod to the fact that he has that one vulnerability, if you look at the way I drew him in the book, he wears sandals. And this is a little bit off, so I'm going to pick it up and show it. The armor actually comes down, to the back. And he has like a piece of armor that hangs off the back of his ankle and protects him. In fact, in the book, when I do eventually show his death, because we see this in this book, he does die eventually, I do show him getting stabbed there. So I guess I am on the side of things that's his weak spot. I don't know. I guess I go kind of wait. So he takes this new armor. He comes out. He chases Hector around Troy. They literally run 3 circles around Troy. Hector's like, I'm not going to fight. You're crazy. And he's like, no, I'm going to kill you. And when they finally fight, Hector, like I said, who is straight up, by our modern standards, the most sympathetic and heroic character. There's this heartbreaking scene where he says goodbye to his wife and their baby child. And like he's a good son to his dad. And he's even a good brother to his cruddy brother, Paris. He's like, Achilles, I know you're going to kill me. I'll fight as best as I can, but you are literally this daughter of a god. I'm not going to be able to defeat you. Just, I ask you give my body back to my family. Because, burial is important. We know you can't get into the afterlife unless you're prepared certain ways. They give you a coin and things. Achilles murders. He kills Hector. It's brutal. And then, instead of doing the honorable thing, and this is his big failing, the wrath of Achilles, his great failing. He takes his sword, he digs 2 holes through the legs, like behind the Achilles tendon, puts a cord through it of Hector, and drives his body over and over around Olympus, dragging it through the dust and the mud, and just ripping it to shreds. Or so he would have been if Hera, who, mind you, is on the Greek side of this thing. The gods are so appalled by his actions. Hera casts a spell to preserve Hector's body from being completely destroyed. And this is kind of it's heartbreaking, especially, I feel like back in the day, the ancient Greeks read this story differently, where they were kind of like, yeah, show him. But most modern people who read this, like, your heart breaks for Hector. You're like, wow, that's terrible. And then the Iliad ends after that. Hermes helps them negotiate surrenders, not a surrender because the war still goes on, basically negotiates at Zeus's behest so that Priam, the king of Troy, can get his son's body back from Achilles finally. And the war goes on. Achilles has other adventures in the war. Some of them are they're all pretty bad, actually. He kills the queen of the Amazons named Penthesilea. He impales her on a horse and falls in love with her at the moment he stabs her. It's a creepy story. He kills this guy Memnon. Memnon fights for the Trojans. Memnon is the son of Eos, the Dawn. We still have to talk about Eos. We talked about her brother and sister, Helios and Selene. We never did Eos. And Eos is so heartbroken at her son being murdered by Achilles that she refuses to let the sun rise. And Zeus has to come in and be like, no, please, come on. I know your job is to scare away Nyx, the darkness that envelops the world. Please do your job again. And he has to step in. Like, this guy causes a lot of problems, right? And then finally, he meets his end. And I should have mentioned this. When he stabs Hector. And Hector, he's got the spear through Hector. And Hector kind of pronounces on his death. Hector, as again, the best person in this, says, you're going to die a non-hero's death. You're going to die a bad way. And I think he even comes out, depending on the source, he even says, my brother is going to kill you, Paris. And most versions of the story, that is exactly what happens. Paris, with a bow and arrow from a distance. Sometimes Apollo taking over the bow and arrow, he even does it straight up, shoots him with an arrow. Sometimes it's poisoned. Sometimes it's anywhere in his body, because it depends on which version of Achilles' immortality or invulnerability you decide to. But the most common version, he shoots Achilles in his vulnerable heel, and Achilles dies. And he has a hero's burial and stuff, but he still dies. His armor, the armor gifted to him, the gleaming black the armor made by Hephaestus, that even has more. Like, the Iliad, it bends badly for everyone. The Greeks were rough on their heroes. We talk about this. And so there's like maybe the two greatest heroes on the Greek side after Achilles are Odysseus and Ajax. Ajax is this huge hulking guy, super duper strong, way stronger than Achilles either, and just not as great a fighter. And Odysseus is the brain, and they both feel like they deserve this armor. And they have this fight, and this madness comes over Ajax, where he thinks he's murdering people to get this armor. Like, he snaps, he's killing his fellow countrymen for it. And luckily, it turns out this is a madness sent on him by the gods. He's just been murdering sheep. But still, the moment when he kind of snaps out of his madness and sees what he's done, and he knows in his heart what he was thinking, Ajax is so overcome with shame that he ends up taking his own life. And then Odysseus ends up giving the armor to, I think, Neoptolemus, his son. I forget what happens to it. I should look that up. But yeah, it's just like death after death after death. It's so much death. So that, I probably left off a lot. There's a lot to say about Achilles. And because he is the main star of the Iliad, so even though he doesn't have a lot of myth necessarily independent of the Iliad, or not as much as some of the other characters we talk about, because the Iliad is such a cornerstone of Western civilization, of just literature in general, like, there are so many, like, it's like, there are so many college papers, so many theses written about this. Like, there's so many aspects, like, were he and Patroclus lovers? Like, all these different things, like, all these different aspects. And was he right to do what he did to Hector? Did this reflect different attitudes towards, heroism back then? There's been so many papers written. I feel like I've only scratched the mere surface. And maybe one day I'll do another episode of Geek Speaks Greek where we get further into this. But I just wanted to go and get the gist of Achilles. Now, this is the part where I throw it open for questions. I want to address a few interesting things that have been directed to me while I'm waiting for your questions to pour in. Somebody today in my piece mentioned in the comments at Instagram, like, I was looking at your version of Achilles, and he looks a lot like Brad Pitt from Troy. And I'm like, yeah, I actually did that on purpose. I forgot to draw on. My Achilles has long hair. Now I'll talk about that in a second. Wolfgang Petersen directed a film called Troy, which is a pretty good retelling of the Trojan War. He did something that drives me nuts, where he takes the Iliad as his main source material and pretty much removes the gods and goddesses from it. So there are many points in the Iliad where the action happens directly because of the intervention of the gods and goddesses. And from my point of view, and probably a lot of your point of views too, that's the coolest stuff. Like, we love to see the gods, right? We're all here because we like a series called Olympians, right? And so they actually remove most of that stuff. But aside from that, it nails a lot of the stuff. And Brad Pitt plays Achilles, and he's a pretty great Achilles. Like, all he has to do is act wrathful and stuff, but, like, he nails it, and he has the look. And my Achilles has long hair as a nod to that idea that he had been posing as a woman for years. So he wears this long hair. So that was just kind of a cool note. I'm like, you're right. He does look like Brad Pitt, because I thought Brad Pitt did a pretty good job. So let's see. Do we get any questions here? His death is like Alexander the Great, super disappointingly non-heroic. Yeah, that happens. I mean, with the Greek heroes, that happens a lot. Are you able to amend the pen drawing after the pen drawing or the pencil drawing? That's from Yehi. I think that's in reference maybe to my finished artwork. I'm not sure. I missed the rest of that. Let me see if I could find the rest of that. Hanika's agreeing that it's a bad move to leave the gods out. Yeah, the movie would have been I love that movie, would have been a million times better without it. How do we know the end of the Trojan War if the Iliad ends at Hector's death? That's a great question, Mishaya. So a lot of people don't realize this. We have the two big epic poems. There's the Odyssey and the Iliad. There used to be an entire epic cycle. There was another, I think it's 7 poems that filled in details from there. Those are just lost to us. We have elements of them. You could find excerpts, things that other people quoted, but the actual texts are lost. That being said, it's generally believed those were not written at the same time. Like is Homer the same guy? Is the Homer who wrote the Odyssey the same Homer that wrote the Iliad? Probably not. It's probably a name taken because we know these stories were hundreds of years old before they even written down. And there's some discrepancies between the way it's written, but like the other epic poems seem to date later than these. But the reason we know the stuff about the rest of the Trojan War, like, hey, the Trojan horse, the most famous thing about the Trojan War, that doesn't occur in the Iliad. That's from other sources. Because these were the source of myths and also, honestly, treated as historical fact for people of the Mediterranean for centuries. So there's many, many, many other accounts of things that happened in the Trojan War. And so we know we know, as far as the Trojan War, we know the few weeks dealing with the Iliad the best because we have the Iliad. But there's all these different, like, fragments of other epic poems or myths or just so many things that have survived to us. If you're really into it, you could do a really interesting deep dive just reading all these, like, accounts that have survived to us in fragmentary form. And so we've been able to piece together a fairly complete idea of the entire cycle and story of the Trojan War, keeping in mind there's a lot of things that kind of contradict each other. But there's a lot of different accounts. Also, a lot of the stuff about the Trojan War we find out from the Odyssey, where Odysseus will kind of mention in passing, because that takes place after the war's ended. He'll mention some of the things about how it wrapped up. So we learn some things about the ending there, too. Does Thetis ever see Achilles again during the Trojan War? Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, because he doesn't meet his end just then. Thetis does get to see him again, but it is with sorrow. He kind of made the choice the way he behaves in the defeat of Hector kind of seals his fate. And she's aware of that. And I have a scene even in Ares, which is the book that covers this, where the gods are all witnessing this happen. And like I said, it's a very God-centric view, so it's kind of like you're with the gods watching this happens. And for them, everything's going by very quickly because their time scale is much different than ours. And Zeus sees it and he proclaims, it's like he sealed his fate. This is what happens. He had a choice to make. He behaved without honor, and now he's going to die. And you see her turn away, and she just has like a tear. I think she just says his name. So she knows that her son is doomed at that point. Why do you think, of all the people to kill this fearless warrior, it's Paris, seemingly the coward of the tale? I think it's specifically, there's 2 reasons, and they're very interconnected. Paris is definitely the coward. There's even kind of a view you kind of see it. I've even heard it's a little bit of a dig. Like you see Odysseus, like there's the famous scene in the Odyssey where he pulls his mighty bow, and like his weapon is the bow, and that's kind of regarded as a coward's bow. It wasn't like you weren't fighting up front. So Paris, like Hector's pronunciation upon being killed is like, you're going to die a bad death. And he doesn't get to die the heroic death. He doesn't die in battle fighting another demigod or even like face to face like with Hector. He dies being sniped. He doesn't get a chance. And for like a great Greek warrior, that was viewed as like, that's a rough way to go. He doesn't end up having that grand moment where he goes out. You see sometimes in art, like he's literally climbing a wall when it happens. He just falls. Like he just dies just without, it's almost like a weird afterthought. For like the greatest hero, like he dies kind of like, doesn't have a big scene, so to speak. It's something almost happens in the background. And also I think it's because the Greeks did venerate him. He comes out bad here. He's not as bad as Theseus. But by our modern standards, like there's a lot of real problems with stuff. I think having him be killed by the coward also, it makes the Trojans kind of look bad. Their greatest hero was Hector. He met Achilles face to face and couldn't defeat him. And so the only way the Trojans could defeat him was by trickery. They had to sneak and hide. So it's kind of both. Like Achilles gets his just desserts, But at the same time, the Trojans don't get to claim, oh yeah, sure, you destroyed our city and sacked it and everything, but we killed your dude. They did kill their dude, but you know. Let's see what else. Do you think the Trojan War was a real event? Yeah, I actually do. Not necessarily as the way it happened, but there's a lot of evidence to show this that this actually occurred. For most of history since then, in the West, we had decided that Troy wasn't even a real place. And there was this guy named Herman Schliemann. He was this German dude, a little bit of an eccentric, kind of an amateur archaeologist who read the Iliad and the Odyssey and felt it was describing real places. There were so many details. He's like, there's no way this is just being made up. This is being told to a specific audience at a specific time, referencing actual events. And he was able to take clues from that, and he actually did find Troy. It's in Turkey. And it turns out it's not just like Troy. There's been multiple, I think there's 7 cities built on top of each other. So this conflict, I don't think it really happened because Helena was kidnapped and her husband, the king of Sparta, got his brother, the king of all Greeks, to get everybody together. I think that's probably something that was a gloss put on it. But I think that the Achaean people definitely got together and waged battle on the people of Troy, who were a similar people. The city-states. Remember, there's no country of Greece. There's all these different city-states, all these different nations, and sometimes they're allied against each other, and sometimes they're allied with. And I think they sacked and destroyed the city of Troy. I think that definitely happened. Will I make a episode on Eurynomy and Themis? Maybe. I should definitely do Thetis. This one kind of counted for her, right? If Troy had won the war, would the Greeks just go home, or would Troy take over all of Greece? The Greeks would have just gone home. The Trojans were definitely fighting a defensive battle here. The Greeks set up on the beaches surrounding their city, laid siege for a decade, as it turned out. And the Trojans were just fighting to survive and to, it all ties into the whole... if you want the roots of this, I kind of glossed over it because there was so much to cover here, but it's the whole, when Eris threw the apple for the greatest goddess of all, and it all goes back to then. Basically, this was a war kind of set up by the gods themselves, and basically Helen became this bartering chip where Paris chose Aphrodite as the most beautiful goddess because Aphrodite, well, she is, but also she promised Paris the hand of the most beautiful woman in the world in marriage, who was already married to the king of Sparta. So she just took him away, and then this started this whole battle. I don't think the Trojans had any eyes on global domination or anything, any more than after defeating the Trojans, the Greeks didn't take over the whole world either. It was a very costly war. It wiped out generations, a generation. And that was kind of Zeus's idea. Remember, he kind of engineered this war so that there would be a generation of demigods wiped out. That was one of the reasons he did this. It was very costly, and I think it ended in the complete destruction of Troy, kind of. And then it also ended in, the Greeks, it was the end of their heroic age. I say it was kind of the destruction of Troy because, as we'll learn when we do Aeneas, Troy has some pretty long mythological roots that extend to a certain eternal city that still is the capital of Italy to this day. So he did clarify the question, asking about can you amend ink lines afterwards. On the comics pages, can you and do you fix the pen lines? So when I'm doing, I wish I actually had some pages to show you. I feel like it would be bad if I ran. It's a little bit too far away, but I'll do an episode soon where I show some artwork of this. When I'm drawing the actual finished artwork for Olympians, I lightly draw it in pencil. Then I actually physically ink it with an actual it's called a G-nib. It's what they use in Japan to do manga. I dip it in ink and I draw the pages out like that. And Yehi's question is ink is very permanent. If I make a mistake, how do I fix it? Well, there's 2 things I do, Yehi. I draw very, very fast. I can normally draw about 2 pages a day. And if I really screw up, if I make the page if the mistake is terrible, I'm drawing the most important face and I just blop it, I might just throw the entire page out and start over again. Because when I make a mistake, it just feels bad. And I don't want to look at a page and feel bad as I'm drawing it. So I might redraw it. If it's a minor detail, once I scan it in my computer, then I switch the artwork to just pure black and white. And I do a lot of cleanup. Any page you see, I've done some digital cleanup on it. And sometimes I'll erase lines that went over a little bit. And using a program called Clip Studio, sometimes I'll draw in a little bit as well, if there's something like a detail. Actually, I'm doing a bunch of parts right now of Dionysus where there's a lot of starry skies. And rather than taking a paintbrush and paint everything in and then drawing in little white dots like the stars, I'm doing that digitally. So yeah, I do some of the work digitally. Who else do we have here? Don't you think the Iliad would make an awesome TV series? Yeah, Doc Delta, and I think it was. I feel like there was an actual Iliad TV series. I know there was an Odyssey one where I think it was Armand Assante, is that his name? Where he played Odysseus. It was actually pretty cool. Like, I remember watching this and be like, this is actually surprisingly accurate. It was cool because he was a little bit older, and Odysseus should be older as he's returning from the war. And I think they did an Iliad, but I never saw it. But yeah, it would be great. It would be amazing to see this. It's interestingly paced, especially because we'll get to this probably on Monday next week. I mentioned how it starts off where Odysseus is kind of having, Ilias, that's not a name, where Achilles is kind of sulking in his tent and not fighting. And there's like this whole chunk of the Iliad where we're just following Diomedes, who's another one of the Greek heroes. And that's the part when like Athena takes him on as her champion and she kind of supercharges him. That's when Ares famously gets stabbed by like Diomedes. It's some cool stuff, but like you're like following Diomedes forever. And from what I've heard, the theory is that there used to be a poem only about Achilles, and there was another poem only about Diomedes, and at some point they kind of combined the two. So I'm like, oh, so that would be awkward. Maybe you'd have a few episodes where there's no Achilles. Instead, the actor who plays Diomedes gets to like, hey, look at me, here I am. And then his bit's over, and then you don't see him again for a while, and then it's all back to Achilles and Hector again. In my design, why is Odysseus wearing the hat? That hat is something you actually see a lot in ancient art. Odysseus doesn't have any really super easy to identify symbols, except you'll see him in sculpture form depicted with that sort of sailor traveling hat. And so I did it just as a shorthand. Honestly, I don't feel like he would wear that a lot. He is, after all, the king of Ithaca. He probably had a more regal thing. In my vision of Odysseus in my head, I actually think of when he actually returns home and he's like kind of like cast off his beggar's robes and reveals himself in his glory. And he definitely looks kingly there. When I drew him, the only time he's appeared in my series is in Polyphemus's cave. And as a bit of shorthand, I gave him his kind of sailor's hat that you would see on ancient sculptures. Could I draw Thetis? And somebody, Lil Stereo, likes my shirt. I love this shirt too. It's a giraffe saying moo, I'm a goat. I don't know why it's so funny, but I think it is. I will draw Thetis really quickly. How are we doing for time? I'm going to draw the version of Thetis that we see most often. This is Thetis, because she is a shape changer. When we first meet her in Aphrodite, this is the form she's wearing. She has kind of like long orange hair. The design behind that was actually, I was going to give Achilles the same color hair. And it wasn't until I was doing the designs for Ares that I realized there was already, the king of Sparta was already going to have orange hair. It's a specific mention. I'm like, can't have two of the main guys with orange hair. So I made him blonde a la Brad Pitt. And then Achilles' mom having orange hair just became kind of a weird remnant. Give her a little bit of a smile there. Making her look a little coy. She's made quite a few appearances in Olympians. For like a character who is ostensibly a minor goddess, she's got a pretty meaty role in Aphrodite. And we see her marriage. We set up the things that lead to this. Then we see she has a bit of a starring role in Ares, where she puts a lot of things into motion, including creating the armor for her son. Then in Hephaestus, she and Eurynomé, who I actually portray as lovers in there. Again, the idea that back in ancient Greece, it wasn't as clear cut. You like boy, girl, you could like whoever. So her and Eurynomé are a bit of a couple there, and they raise baby Hephaestus. And then she's even making a small cameo appearance in Dionysus because she helped save Dionysus. So I think for I guess she's on a rock. I guess for a minor goddess, she's made a lot of appearances, maybe like the most of any of the characters in Olympians. Let's give her some more of her hair. She's fun to draw too. What else do we have? I know I said this before, but could you do a thing in Diomedes, please? Yeah, I guess you came in a little bit later. So this is Epic Hero Week, and the plan is I'm starting a day early because I wanted to do 4 people. So we're starting with Achilles, who's the main epic guy. On Monday, I think I'm going to do Diomedes to cover. Oh, cat's knocked over stuff. It's got to happen at least once an episode. Diomedes. Wednesday will be Odysseus. Friday will be Aeneas. This is of next week. Ooh, can I draw a Hector? I only have 5 minutes left. Wait, I don't remember what my Hector looks like. Let me see. Have a copy right here. Hector is one of those characters who I feel like didn't get a lot of face time in here. I think we literally see him when he's being killed. And I drew him wearing the old golden armor of Achilles. So I actually don't remember what his helmet looks like at all. But Hector, the solid, noble family man, gave him, I think he's just a goatee. Yeah. He has a bearing much like that of a god. They mention that. Like, he's very tall and handsome, super noble. I would love to do an episode just on Hector, but I don't really know that he has much of a mythology outside of the story of the Iliad. He is, he's of the other. He is, of course, he is a Trojan prince, not a Greek prince. And he is, even though, weirdly, again, there's been a million papers about this. He is portrayed amazingly noble. He's the most sympathetic and straight up heroic character in the Iliad. And it's like, wow, that's weird. He's on the bad guy team. But, I mean, there's a reason why the Iliad is regarded as one of the greatest works ever written. And that's part of it. It's like one of the first things, too. And already they're being super sophisticated. So, here he's wearing the original golden base breastplate of Achilles. I just have him with bare arms here because I don't remember what else he had. And I don't know if I ever really designed a helmet. So there's my Hector. I've always kind of had a clear image in my head of what Hector looks like. I have some... If I ever do that idea where I'm going to continue these stories in a way that doesn't reflect the myths, one of the ideas I would really love to establish, I would love to explore more the character of Hector. Because, this guy, he deserved better. He got sucked into a conflict that wasn't his fault. It was all his brother's fault. He just fought for the side. He tried to protect his father. His only thought upon death is for hey, just make sure my family is okay. He's just such a good guy. And he just gets, Achilles drags him around like he's a sack of garbage. It's terrible. It's a really sad story. Let's see. Who is more cool to you, Hector or Achilles? Okay, so I'm going to be fully honest here. This is me bringing my modern day sensibilities to this. And I understand in ancient Greece, they would have viewed this differently, probably. But yeah, I think Hector's cooler. He's... By what we consider heroic standards nowadays, he embodies that more. He does what's right. He's fighting. He looks out for his family. The scene where he's saying goodbye to his wife and his baby son is heartbreaking. And compare that where he's fighting for this with the guy who kills him was I wanted a slave and you didn't let me get a slave. That's nothing to be proud of. That's terrible. Oh, we just got the 2-minute marker, so we're just about done here. Let's see. Have I ever played or heard of the game Smite? I have not, but I will look it up afterwards. Is there a bad team in the Trojan War? That's an interesting question. Paris, you could say, doesn't have a lot going for him. Agamemnon comes off super bad in the Iliad, for that matter. There's not... So I guess, ostensibly, you're supposed to be on the Greek side because it's a Greek story. But the Trojans... Priam comes out looking pretty good. Hector comes out looking pretty good. Aeneas comes out looking pretty good. It's very fair, which maybe even gives idea to the fact that this is more closely based on historical stuff than we realized. Maybe the poets who would go around talking about this were yeah, they got destroyed and that was the end of their thing, but there were some good people there. Maybe they even knew some of the specific people. Some of the Greeks come out looking really bad. It's really interesting. You could make the argument the bad guys won. So I guess it looks like that's about all I'm going to have time for because we're down to 54 seconds. So let me just do my closing spiel. Oh, I dropped my sign. If you get a chance to do any artwork and want to share it with me, please send it to me on my email, georgeoconnorbooks@gmail.com. Or if you have any questions or stuff, I have a lot of emails I have to write back to people. Also, old man noises, I bend over. You can catch my old episodes on my YouTube, youtube.com/user George Olympians. Also, they've been just saving them all of a sudden as IGTV, so you can just watch them here. But thank you so much for joining in. This was the preemptive start on Epic Hero Week with the most epicest of heroes, Achilles, with a little bit of, we got some Hector in there, we got some Thetis in there. So join me next Monday, 3 p.m. Eastern, where we're going to explore the strange case of Diomedes. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.